Hey guys. Hey, this is webinar number 32. It's about 10 to 18 handed play in 180s. You can take the information in here and you could extrapolate it to 45 mans. It's just conceptual ideas on how whenever you're deep in the game or you make the money in whatever game, how you can break down the section um, or the sections of in the money play. Like for example, when I played 9 mans, I thought of three-handed as its own kind of subset within the game, and then heads up as its own section. So it's the same thing here, except it's a little more complicated because there's more players in the game still. So when I play, and that's my dog making a funny sound, I break it down into like 17 and 18 handed play, 13 to 16, and 10 to 12. You may have your own versions of this, and that's fine. You just want to make sure that you consider it in little subsets as you play. 17 and 18 hand is probably the simplest thing when we think about things to keep in mind. Most important thing, I think, is once you cash, be careful for short stacks who are satisfied with cashing. I learned this. Oh, thank you, sir. I learned this for the first time when I was playing 9 mans, because I started realizing that every time the bubble broke, not every time, but a lot of times, say I would shove blind versus blind, the first hand of in the money play, and I get looked up really wide, and I started wondering, because at first I was just thinking, okay, this guy's a donk, he's making a stupid call, he's just a bad player. But I started realizing that there's times when I could save myself from stuff like that happening. And it happens because some players have this mentality where once they cash, they're happy. And when someone's happy, then they let their guard down a little bit. When people are timid about the money, they tend to be tighter. But if people are happy with what they have, people get a little looser. I started noticing people calling me wider and wider. So a cool strategy that I was using in 9 mans was like the first several hands of in the money play, I wouldn't really shove that much. I would consider limping a lot, blind versus blind, to just stop players from making calls. So in 17 and 18 handed play, you just want to be careful for short stacks who have snuck into the money and might just be happy and be willing to call off. So these are the type of opponents who make those calls. I call them give up calls, where they're like, yes, okay, whatever, I give up. And so this mostly happens in the first few hands in the money, and this could be any game you play. It doesn't have to just be 180 mans. So if you spot a player like this, try not to play aggressively into them. So like say blind versus blind, it folds around to you the first hand in the money play. There's a guy who's really short in the big blind who's just snuck into the money. If you have a really bad hand, just consider limping instead of shoving and having them call with a really wide range. So in the average stack will tend to be deeper in a $3 rebuy, so it won't apply as frequently in those games, but it'll be mostly in just the normal kind of freeze-out structures, the non-rebuy ones, because stacks are shorter on average. And that's basically it with 17, 18-handed play. I'm not going to be too crazy loose in those stages because you're at a full table, which means you have less opportunities to do something. However, if you were in a 17, 18-handed game where it wasn't a 180 man, where say it was a big MTT and you're really, really deep, totally different because it's a different atmosphere. If you're playing in a game where 1,000 people started and there's 18 people left, be aggressive because the pressure is different. People have been playing for a longer amount of time. There's more, potentially more timidness because there's probably more money for the big prize. So there's the things to keep in mind. Also, probably, I would guess on average, people will probably be a little looser in a $2 game than a $15 game just because of the amount of money. But it's all proportional. If someone plays 1 cent games, I don't even know if those exist, a $2 thing would be a big thing to them. And if someone always plays $10 games, they're playing 15, it's not as big of a deal. So anyway, 13 to 16 is where it starts to get important here. So I have this hand right here I want to look at. So basically at this point, you're usually going to see about 6 to 8 handed at your table. Generally, you want to kick up the aggression beginning at six-handed. It's kind of like when you go to a short-handed table. Otherwise, you want to look for late position spots to open pots for raises, or by shoving. But be careful in early position spots, because with so many people behind you, it becomes more and more likely that someone's going to have a hand. So another thing that's really important about this stage is to not make marginal all-in calls with greater than 10 normal big blinds. So I want to look at this hand right here. This is actually, let's see, $3 rebuy that Redding Stone played, and at this point, I think there's about 13 people left. No, it's five-handed at this table. It must be a little less. Maybe this is 12. Might be less than 13. This still applies, though. Okay, so this is a small error. Wrong section I put this in. Still applies. What do you guys do? Okay. We get a jam, we get a fold. Right off the bat, two people, opposite answers. We get a shove. Anybody else? Got it on. We're 3-1 right here so far. 4-1. I'll go in the fold department with you, so 4-2. Anybody else? How many people are here today that can answer? 1, 2, 3. That's almost everybody. So what are your reasons for... Yes, under the gun raised. Under the gun raised. Did everybody see that? Okay, so now we're 3-3, actually. Oh! Yeah. You know, it's partially my fault. I should have said it. So... Okay. Webinar just started, but that's the comment of the webinar so far. So anybody changing their mind now that that guy min raises UTG? I agree. If the button was to open shove, easy jam right here, because his range is probably much, much wider. When you say we have a big stack and we can make him fold, do you mean the initial raiser? Okay. Excuse me. So let's pretend that that the under the gun raiser folds 100% of the time if you rejam. How much folding equity do you have in this hand? Very good. Very, very good. There's still zero folding equity. That's very important. So if that initial person were to fold, it would be the equivalent of now the button is jamming a much tighter range, and then there's just 12K bonus in the pot. But once that guy comes in for a min raise, his range is much tighter on the button. Sure, it's none. So why are you not sure? What's going through your mind? Yeah, so if the original raiser folds, zero folding equity. $6.5K. Where's the 6.5K come from? I'm confused. Where does 6,500 come from? Am I blind? I'm so confused. 12K minus 5.5. Where does 5.5 come from? There's 55. Oh. Wait, is it just you missed the last number there? Because it's kind of, there you go. I see what you mean. Yes. I understand now. I totally understand. Yes, there would be 6.5K folding equity out there. Yes, if that was 5,500. All right, you're dead on. Whoops, I just totally misclicked the wrong button. That's okay. No, I totally understand what you mean now. Okay, cool. Yeah, so really important to recognize, even though if he folds 100% of the time, there's still no folding equity. Very important. But now we know that the button is on a somewhat tight range here because that guy min-raised. So now we agree now it's a fold. I fold too. What about if you didn't have pocket eights? What if you had something else like ace queen? Now what? Okay, good. Good. What about ace king? Okay, we get a queen's plus. What about ace king? Nuts? Tens and ace king. Okay. I don't know if I would fold, actually. Like, I think a shove with ace king might be okay. It's definitely the worst hand. It's the worst hand. Like in this hand, I'm thinking like jacks plus with an optional range of like tens and ace king. So like I always write that out like I write it like that. So it's like jacks plus with maybe those hands. I think if you shoved ace king here, that would be fine. How about this? What if you knew that the original raiser would not fold? Or how about this? What if the original raiser shoved? Bingo. Good. Hey, good. This is really good. Ace king is weak three-handed here. And what's really important too, keep in mind, part of the illusion in this hand is the fact that the original guy min-raised. So by shoving ace king here, it feels more correct than if we were to be the third caller in the pot. However, if the original raiser does not fold, it's the same thing. It's just this one feels correct because you're shoving ace king. But then if you're calling it, it feels worse. But they could just be identical because it would be the same. If that guy doesn't fold, it's as if he shoves. It's this illusion that he gives off. If he raises the 12, it gives the illusion that you can make him fold. But good, I'm glad you fold ace queen. I'm glad you fold this. So we had a nice long discussion about this in the coaching session. Whoa. But if that comes, it's a good play. My motto is fold if you're going to lose, call if you're going to win, for whatever. So I'm glad he won, but definitely a call that should be avoided there. So basically, not only is the call, I'll say it, bad, but it's not just bad on this hand. It's bad for your future value as well. So whenever you have a good stack, especially as good as this, and which is more common in a $3 rebuy. If I had aces, I probably, I don't know, maybe just call. I don't know. Probably just call, but it might not make too much of a difference since it's a small stack, but yeah. Probably call more often. So whenever you have a good stack, you want to try and preserve this to utilize your future expected value. And that's, kind of like the whole don't chop off your balls thing. but a lot of your future value comes from folding equity. And of course, you always have folding equity, assume you have enough chips to make someone fold. But a lot of your future folding equity comes from how often you're involved in pots. And so, in like the more hands that you can raise pre-flop, and the more frequently you can do that, the more folding equity you'll pick up over time. And when you risk a large portion of your stack, if Renning Stone happens to lose this, he's probably going to be tighter after he loses 60K than if he just had his stack right now. And certain stacks, like at least here he has almost 30 big blinds, and if he loses 10, he's still at 20. But imagine if you were at 20 big blinds and then you lost 10 big blinds, then you were at 10. You're probably not going to open pots anywhere close to as often. And that's really important, is how it can damage your folding equity. Calling in marginal spots, although potentially profitable, like, could this 8s be profitable? Yeah, maybe. But it'll just contribute to swingy results. So anytime you are confused about an important call, just don't do it. So this will save you in your games, and really, really important to save yourself. So anytime you're in a spot like this, even if you had something like 9s here or 10s, and if you were like, I don't know, I'm not sure, just fold. And this will minimize the chance that you make a mistake. So here is one more hand. So we're not going to call with this particular hand, but this is a common example of something that happens a lot. Range. So any queen. Now you have a good point. You said same as shovers. So it's like the thing we talked about, 1.5 to 1 odds, how you can match the shovers range. And remember the other thing we talked about, it just means theoretically you can match the shovers range. But it doesn't mean you actually want to do that. Because, for example here, let's pretend that the guy is shoving ATC. Okay? Oops. Look, this is a profitable call. Don't do this. Don't call just because it's profitable. Look, you only need to be 39.6, you're 43.5. That's called profit. But the problem is when you call, then what? Then you ruin a lot of time that you could sit here and raise. What if this was 10-handed? I know I put this in the 13 to 16 hand section, but notice how this can depend on where you are. Like where you are in the game, how many people are left. Like if there were a couple more people at this table, this guy's range is probably going to be exactly the same. The only thing that changes is maybe there's a couple extra annies in the pot, which would make your call even more profitable. Could just keep jamming. It's true. What happens is when we call, we force ourselves to go to showdown. And the more often you take plays like that, the more often your results can go up or down. Swingy, swingy. It doesn't mean calling is bad. You make money by calling with 10-4. You make money by calling with Queen 2. It's a good question. How much percentage on top over the break-even mark do we want to compensate for variance? That's a really good question. Because what that is that's a question you're managing risk and reward. You're saying, okay, I'm risking calling here. I know this is going to lead to results that are going to go up or down. So how much do I need here to call? Like, manage that risk and reward. I would say the best calling range here. Well, even if you knew 7%, how would you know in game? Like, think about how can you actually apply this in game? Like, you would never know what hand is 47% here. How would you ever know that? So, because you can discuss like theoretical stuff. That, oh, well, if I had 7% more, then I call. But how do you know? Think about how could you figure out if this is a call in game? How could you actually have this make a difference to your results while you play? How much percentage you compensate? Incomplete. What? I don't understand. What do you mean by incomplete VPIP? What do you mean by that? Still a little confused.
Well, yeah, if you have a small sample, you're not necessarily going to know what he's shoving. I mean, okay. What if you had no idea? I've heard rumors that PokerStars is going to not allow HUD anymore. I don't know if that's true, but if that happened, what do you do here? Like, what if you have no stats? What if you have no notes? What if you just have to make a decision and you don't know? Stats are great. Stats are awesome. But you can't use them as like a crutch to walk around with. You have to learn eventually to walk on your own. Okay. Whatever you are happy to show.
That kind of feeds into what I was thinking a little bit. Just call if you're confident. What are you confident with? Not like what range you think is good, but what are you confident calling with? That should be a good calling range here. Queen 9 plus, sure. Now, look, based on the fact that this is five-handed, I can't tell if this is 10, 11, or 12 people left in the game. One drawback of calling is if you call and this is 10-handed, obviously you're rooting to win. You would jump to a final table. So you miss opportunities to raise. That's one downfall of calling here. It wrecks future 10-handed value. It's a good point by Puyo. Calling is good for future equity, true. One downfall, it could be good and bad. It's good if you remain short-handed like this. It's not as good, although it's not bad, but it's not as good if you go to a full table, because then you have less opportunities to do something. Of course, it would depend on the game type. If this was like some MTT thing, well then even if you go to a full table, you'd still have tons and tons of leverage on people. Well, it wouldn't really know if it wouldn't really matter if he knows that we call wide, because if we call, we're rooting to win, and if we win, he's out, and so it wouldn't play an effect until however long it takes until we come across him in an important situation later on, and who knows if he even remembers who you are now. Well, how would it be massive in the long run that he sees us call like that? Like, what's your long run versus this guy? How often have you played this guy? And then how often, of the times you played that guy, do you actually come across him in some type of significant situation where calling him with whatever hand here would actually influence something? I think if you were playing a live game and it was just a one-time thing, but then you, for some reason, like if you call, he's not out of the game, I guess. Maybe it was a really loose river call or something where you can prove to him that you can make a good call, but he's still in the game, and since it's live, that will kind of stick in his head. So even if you play 10K plus games, how often do you come across this guy in an important situation? Well, I want to know. Like, because even if you have, say, 1,000 hands on someone or something like that, how many of those actually were when you were in an important spot and then you kind of came across each other? I think if you were playing like a 9-man or something, there's more of that kind of happening because you play the same guy all the time and you're always at the same table. Well, I'm glad those things stick in your head. I mean, that's good, but you're very smart. These regs aren't really as smart as you. I mean, you have a really good memory about stuff. Yeah, I understand. I mean, trying to think, there was a guy, if you guys have ever heard of the salad fork. And it was probably like 2.5 years ago. I remember he called me with Jack 7 blind versus blind for 10 big blinds. I don't think anything ever happened after that with that guy. That was like 2.5 years ago. And like I always played that guy. And we were even always at the same table. But think about 180 mans. I mean, there's tons of great guys who play these things, but like, how often do you come across them in important spots? That I Hate Rivers guy, who was really cool. Like when I was playing a lot, I made one deep run with him ever. That was it. Once. Like, and me and that guy played in the same games all the time. But it was only one time where we both made it deep together. I'm sure it happens more than that. Well, I'm glad that they tighten up. I just hope that you don't have to spew in one hand just to hope to affect one future hand. It's like it's an investment. But even though something's profitable, you just want to make sure that you're not blowing your stack. Because even though there's a reg at the table, there's also X amount of other people it's easier to beat. Let's see what he did. He folded. This is a profitable call. Oh. So my favorite stuff, 10 to 12 handed. So this is a time to build your stack. Yeah. You can do whatever you want in game, really. 10-12 hand, time to build your stack. You know that by now. Elementary stuff. Raise and shove as much as possible when you have the opportunity. Main reason is less people at the table means higher probability of taking a pot down uncontested. That's the most important thing. So now we hit this hand. What's your opening range here? Okay. Sorry. Wicked Souls? That's Wicked Souls? Did he join? I can never pronounce his name. I can't pronounce Carlos. Okay, Puyon. What range would you not mind getting in with the big blind? Good, Chris. What I like about this comment right here, and Puyon's comment, and Ken's too, but mostly these, I'll tell you why though. Because, like Chris, you didn't give a specific range And that's what I really like about your comment. It's like, I like ATC, like I raise ATC here a lot of times, but I don't just always raise ATC. Like in this specific game, what you said is really cool. Like you don't have the same range all the time, and that's really important because so many times people will say like, "What's your range here? What do you do?" You know, and even though ATC is probably, I raise ATC a lot in a spot like this, a lot, almost always. But there's times when your range is just, it's fluid, and I think we mentioned that before. It's like it flows like water. How do you know? It just moves. It changes. See, that's really interesting, Puyon. That's a really tight range there. See, now that you say something like this, Chris, can you give us an example of, I know we don't know anything in this situation, but can you give an example of just a range that you might raise when you don't know too much? Because we know that Chris is obviously allowing his range to change based on what game he's in. But how about just giving us an example? Okay. Well, I have a question for you. If they were all tight, then why do you would only show Queen 6 when you get it in with the button if they're all tight, or maybe if you decided to call the big blind. Because if you raise fold, you don't show anything. Yeah, there is. Tim's got a point. There is 15K right there. Okay. I mean, you could even limp here if you want to. You don't even have to raise. If you were worried about raising and showing a bad hand, you could just limp too. And you have 25 big blinds. You can call the button if he shoves over. You can do lots and lots of things here. I mean, in terms of how often I'd limp here, we're talking like less than 2% of the time, probably. Maybe not with sevens, though. I mean, something like, I don't know, if you just have 5-4 suited and you didn't want to raise for whatever reason, you could do it. I'd probably raise still, mostly. This is cool. You would raise anything that can hit top pair. 3 deuce can't hit top pair. Let's see, 4 deuce can hit top pair. Of course, if you had 4 deuce, that would imply that you have 2 pair, because if you hit top pair with 4 deuce, then you'd have to have a 4-3-3 board. Right? But I know what you mean. Like something like Jack 9 or something can flop a good top pair. Something like this. Something like that is good. But what's really important here is just let your range change based on where you are. Start to feel your instinct talking to you. If you feel like you should raise Queen 6 offsuit, like was said before, how we wouldn't want to raise it, but if you felt like you wanted to raise it, and get in touch with your gut here. And it's really important when you're 10 to 12 handed, mainly because there's just, with less people at the table, it just means it's more likely to take down a pot. So now the biggest difference between $3 rebuys and the normal ones are that the stack depths will be different. So in non-rebuys, it might be more likely that people are short, and you just want to be always conscious about the stacks around you. Who are you going to call? Who are you not going to call? Know what you're going to do before it even happens. Like if I was raising here to say 12K, I know I'm going to call the button, duh. And the big blind actually don't have to call here. If he reshoves, it would be a total of 41K for about 7 big blinds. And we talked about this before. You don't actually have to call. Sometimes you're not even getting the odds. But there's some hands I'd want to call that guy with and some hands I wouldn't. Example, if I had Jack 10 suited here, I wouldn't mind calling the big blind at all. But if I had Queen 6 offsuit, like Chris said, I wouldn't want to call the big blind. So sometimes I would raise a little more than 12 if I wanted to call. Is it a tell? Yeah, no one picked up on it. But then sometimes I wouldn't either. But basically, you can always just have a plan. Like, do I want to call or do I not want to call? And you know who you're going to do it against, and it makes hands so much easier to play because you already have kind of a premeditated plan going on. Let's see what happens. Easy game, right? Let me add this stuff. So, stage of game usually makes people tighter than normal. You know that. And it allows you to pick up more pots at this stage. So keep in mind that once 9-handed play begins, you will have less opportunities to pick up pots because you're going to have less late position spots because you're at a full table. So keep that in mind, that this is kind of the time when you need to attack, 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 attack. Because once you go back to 9-handed at the next table, it's only natural to tighten up a little bit because you're going to have less good spots to come in for a raise. It's less likely you'll pick up pots pre-flop because there's more people behind you. More people behind you means the higher likelihood someone has a good hand. So kind of get your craziness out now, build your stack, so then you can sit around a little bit at the beginning of final table and wait. Of course, if this was an MTT where the final table was super, super way more important than a 180 man, it wouldn't apply as much because there's more pressure, and more pressure means people fold more often. So we kind of already mentioned this, that in a $3 rebuy, assuming you have a good raising stack of about 12 normal big blinds or more, obviously this is time to raise and pick up tons of pots. Please, 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 and I hear this way too often. Oh, and I totally didn't even fill in the end here. Don't make excuses that you can't raise because it's a turbo. Oh my god, please don't. But the most common thing, the stacks aren't deep enough. I hear that a lot. Like, I can't raise because, oh, you're never deep enough to raise. If you are thinking like this, then it means that you are, and I guess maybe it's a good thing I didn't fill that in. And ... you can fill in the blank yourself. Whether it's a cruel word or some motivational phrase or something. Don't make excuses that you can't raise in a spot. I know that in, nit. In this game, it's easier to raise because you have a bigger stack. But let's pretend that this was not a rebuy. The blinds wouldn't be 6K at this stage of game. They'd be something like 1,600, 2,000, or 3,000. There's a lot of times at this point where you have 36,000 chips and the blinds are 1,500, 3,000. So many guys say, oh, you can't raise with 12 big blinds. You can't do that. Yeah, you can. You just always want to be cautious about what's going on and always just be thinking. Yeah, that means that you are limited. I like that. Yeah. So just always be on the lookout while you're playing the 10 to 18 handed section of the game. Break it down into however you see fit. So for me, it's 17, 18, 13, 16, 10, 12. And just try and adjust to each section of the game. Don't make hero calls if you're not sure. Raise a lot to pick up chips and prepare yourself for a final table. Any questions, comments, something? That is it. It's Neil. Neil is back. You're welcome. Anybody have any questions? Not the most difficult webinar of all time. Do you mean in terms of what? Like re-shoving on people? What? Like what specifically? So I never really understood that term, like bubble. What does that mean? Just be really aggressive on the bubble? Is that what you mean? Well, Well, I wouldn't go nuts. I mean, it's like when you can drive a car really fast, but if you don't know how to use the brakes, then eventually you're just going to crash. Um, so just use the brakes sometimes, but feel free to go as fast as you want. Yeah, and I think bubble owning in 9-mans is definitely overrated a lot. Um, a big reason is because people have been playing for a shorter amount of time, and they've probably won 9-mans before. I mean, the reason why being aggressive when you're really deep is so effective in 180-mans is because you're playing against opponents who haven't gotten deep as frequently as 9-man players. Because you could be the worst 9-man player on earth, and I'm sure you've won or cashed in a lot of 9-man games. But when it comes to 180s, if you're just kind of an average or not so good player, it's less likely that you have first, second, and thirds and final tables under your belt and on your kind of like your experience resume. And that's why it's effective. I think it's definitely more effective as you move up in stakes, but not too high in stakes. Like I think in 15s and 8s and $3 rebuys, it's really effective to be very aggressive on the final table bubble. It's probably a little less effective in 2s, depending on who the opponents are, but still effective nonetheless. But then probably as you go higher and higher, because $36 180s, just depending on what players you're playing with at that 10-handed mark, there's some players who they have no fear at all and they don't care. It just depends who the guy is, because probably like as you go higher, you're more and more likely to be around players who they're not intimidated as much. But then at the same time, there could be players who are even more intimidated because it's a lot of money. I mean, it's all relative to the individual. So just kind of watch who's active in the game, who's not, and usually the people who are not active are the ones that are going to be a little bit timid. Yeah, I mean, it's weird. Some people do that, some people don't. But if there's things you can see clues into who's tight, like people who walk blind versus blind a lot, or people who don't play a hand for a long time, or people if you do have stats and you notice that they have like single-digit VPIPs, stuff like that. Of course, I think there's more pressure at the final table, bigger pay jumps, but we can do that next time. Any other questions at all? Sure. 27. Growing up. Old. Officially surpassed the amount of letters in the alphabet. Ugh.